Today, for you, dear viewers, I have actually done it. I started watching a YouTube video by Jessie. Someone recommended this YouTuber to me a while ago, and I will be the first to admit I don't like watching these things. They annoy me, they just make me upset, and they're boring. They're never interesting to me because they're wrong, and it's like listening to someone rant at you about how the earth is actually flat. It's entertaining at first, but after a while it just ends up being like, really? Really? Anyhow, I wanted to start with this first video talking about The Handmaid's Tale, because this is one of the first books that I read that really had any feminist message to it. I originally read it when I was about 12 or 13. My brother was going to his first Boy Scout lesson, or troop meeting or whatever, and I was dragged along because I couldn't stay at home. I brought the book with me from the library, and I read literally the whole thing within 2 or 3 hours, and it was amazing to me. It was this horrible dystopia that felt real for reasons I couldn't really put into words. And something that quite honestly annoys me about this specific video is just how it doesn't seem to understand why the book was written. In the same way that I feel like a lot of trans women don't understand what the female experience is, I feel like any sort of literature or story that focuses on female pain and female experiences is going to be inherently misunderstood. But before I get into more detail about that, let's go ahead and watch the video and you can see exactly what I mean.
Back in 2018, I wrote an article for the LGBTQ news magazine The Advocate, a place where I worked as a video producer, and the article was titled, "Why This Trans Woman Can't Identify with The Handmaid's Tale."
Well, that one's easy. Quite simply, it's not about you. The Handmaid's Tale uses examples of real-life female subjugation and puts it all into one dystopia. It is about women's oppression, not about oppression of men who want to be women. This is like reading Passing or literally any text about the Black experience and going, I don't relate to the narrator, I don't feel included. Well, duh, it's not about you. The world doesn't revolve around you and your experiences. And you know what gets me is that if you wanted to write your own version of The Handmaid's Tale, you wanted to write, I don't know, Turftopia or something where you claim you're super duper oppressed, you really can't, because the worst that anyone's ever really done to you is been mean to you on the internet. Like, there really isn't any systematic oppression for trans women. I mean, hell, in a lot of places it's illegal to be trans, but illegal to be homosexual. I'm not denying that trans people have faced some sort of oppression, but that's not on account of them being trans. That's an intersection of homophobia and of misogyny. So even if you really wanted to write something like this, you couldn't, because you don't have any examples that do anything nearly as horrific as what women have faced.
In the article, which you can find linked down below, I argued that it was hard for me to watch Hulu's breakaway dystopian hit, The Handmaid's Tale, because, as a trans woman, I knew I would most likely have been killed as a gender traitor by the Christian fundamentalist society Gilead that the series depicts. And thus, it was hard for me to watch a show that showed such cruelty and trauma, and yet which was not able to focus on what would have happened to me in this oppressive regime given my own identity.
In other words, you don't like it when it's not about you. Literally what I just said. Because honestly, if Gilead were to happen, you could very easily just take off the dress. You could just go back to acting as a man. You could take off the costume and you would be treated as a man and be given a woman to rape. Additionally, I think you're misunderstanding why the women in the story are being targeted and oppressed. It's not because of their gender. It's not because of their identity. It's because of the biological fact of their sex. Your gender identity does not mean jack diddly squat. It means nothing. It's nothing. It's you shouting into the air, I am this, and nothing in the real world changes on account of you yelling this or saying that I am this. That's the difference. And this is why so many of us have such a offense at gender identity politics, because it implies that all you have to do to get out of being oppressed on account of your sex or your sexuality is to just identify out of it. And that's just not true. You can't identify out of what is reality. You can't just say, I'm just going to be a millionaire now, and suddenly the world bends to your whims and you are. It's not how reality works. Not to mention the widespread trend of transsexuality is something that's very, very recent. When this book was written, that was nowhere near the author's mind because that wasn't something that was widespread or overlooked or even a topic of discussion. I mean, misogyny and female oppression has been ongoing since basically the beginning of civilization. There is so much history and there is so much proof, writing, philosophy, whatnot on the topic, and there's not a lot on you because you're a very recent invention.
But all that being said, in the article, I also went on to say this as my end thought. The trans community's exclusion from the futuristic narrative of The Handmaid's Tale is understandable. It just becomes emblematic of the daily fears that I face. Every time I hear about the trans military ban, the Department of Education rescinding protections for trans students, a transgender bathroom bill being voted on, or another conservative rally screaming out, "There are only two genders," I'm reminded that I and trans people like me would likely be one of the first ones to die if Gilead ever comes to pass.
Okay, so first off, none of these things are actively killing you. Like, you're not being forced to die via pregnancy or via femicide or anyone actually murdering you. Your feelings are just getting hurt because the education system says that, hey, maybe we should keep sexes separate, because there have been several examples of boys taking the excuse that being trans gives them to abuse female students. Literally, you are looking at things that are a mild inconvenience to you and saying this is the same thing as being murdered.
That's not to say that I demand trans representation in The Handmaid's Tale like I do from other TV shows. The Handmaid's Tale represents an important conversation we need to have about women's place in the world. With Donald Trump's attacks on women's health organizations like Planned Parenthood, women's reproductive health is very much at stake. It's a crucial fight that I, as a woman without a uterus, don't have the right to suppress.
That doesn't change that you and people like you still do suppress women's rights and women's oppression, the discussion of it. For example, when Roe v. Wade was overturned, half of the discussion on the leftist side wasn't even about how this was giant steps back towards putting women back in the kitchen, but it was instead stuck on use the correct language, make sure you're being inclusive enough to not exclude trans women from the definition of women, but not to, also exclude trans men who are affected without implying that they're actually female. That was a huge part of the Roe v. Wade discussion, was just on the language to not exclude while including the right people, but not excluding the wrong ones in a definition that wasn't actually going to mean anything at all. Regardless of what you are saying, you are suppressing the conversation of women's oppression because you want it to directly include you. And I'm sorry, but you're not a woman. You're not. And every time you try to force yourself into this definition, it's always a circular definition or a nonsensical one. And in the end, you end up quieting discussions of our actual experiences and oppression, which you are never going to face.
While I am a woman and will always fight for inclusion in women's spaces, there are battles that cis women face that trans women don't. And there are battles that cis women don't face that trans women do. Yet we are all still women. We should all stand together to fight for and with each other.
That's so funny to me because you guys have taken over both the women's rights movement and the gay rights movement and made everything center around you. And all of the rights that you've wanted, you've actually gotten. And these aren't even rights, they're just privileges to control the world how you see fit. You literally have the privilege of making the world bow down to you and do as you say. And that's not enough for you?
Now, admittedly, I think I'm a better writer today. Well, a mildly better writer. Basically, my argument was that while The Handmaid's Tale didn't show transgender struggles specifically within the series, I could understand why. And the show as a whole still made me want to understand that while my struggle wasn't depicted, I was still learning and empathizing with the dehumanization and oppression of the women in the series that they faced for their womanhood and reproductive abilities. And also, maybe the show should show some trans narratives at some point, given that they have the reach and opportunity to possibly highlight some.
I love how you try to defend yourself and say, I really do care about women's oppression that I'll never understand. I really do. But they really should consider including me in this adaptation, 100%, because I need to be included to actually care. Like, regardless of what you said before this, what you prefaced the statement with, you literally just admitted directly after that you want it to still include you. You can't have a story that is not about you. This is one of the issues I really see in a lot of media nowadays, where it's like you can't just have like a person of color be a character in a show. They also have to be autistic or neurodivergent or trans or some kind of gender for you to actually empathize with and like the character. And the same thing goes here. You can't empathize or care about these women, about these characters, about the story, because you don't see women as people. It's as simple as that. In the same way that the people don't see people of color as people. You have to have all these other adjectives to make them someone you can personally identify onto for you to have any empathy. You can't empathize with people that you don't consider to be equals, even if they are different than you.
The Advocate, but it did quickly find its way to certain online spaces run by TERFs, trans exclusionary radical feminists.
Which is, in its own, a misnomer, because radical feminism is very inclusionary. It does include trans people, the female ones, the trans men, because they are female and feminism is for females, and you're not female, you're a male.
Where I, as the author, was quickly vilified, dehumanized, and repeatedly misgendered for having written the article.
Oh, boo-hoo. Some people on the internet called you a male, which you are. That's so horrible and mean and nasty. It's almost as if people don't like being called things they don't agree with, which is funny because you tell us all the time to suck it up and just take being called breeders and womb havers and cunts and every other term you can come up with. And it's not just by some random people online you have to literally search out to find out about, because I can guarantee you none of those Tumblrs were sending this directly to your doorstep. No, we're seeing this dehumanizing language directed at women and all kinds of stuff. Legislation, news articles, scientific articles, just everywhere. And we have to just suck it up. We have to just suck it up, and everyone else decides it's fine to pander to you, to add uterus havers and cervix owners and all this shit to it, just so we can include you, who is, as you admitted, a woman without a uterus. So why can't we just say that? Why can't we just exclude you from the definition and just call us women? It makes things so much easier.
And just for funsies, here's some examples.
Man who pretends to be a woman for his creepy sexual fetish. Haha, I can't identify with women's oppression. You don't say. Tell me more. Are you a literal sociopath? What the fuck is wrong with this person who watches this show and reads the book and can only think, oh, well, shit, I'll never be raped repeatedly until I become pregnant, so I can just say I feel anything. Jesus fucking Christ. I officially hate Jessie Earl. I'm fuming. This article is the most misogynistic trash about a man ranting that he can't feel sorry for women because he won't ever suffer the same fate, and he's sad that he won't be made into a sex slave should a dystopian future like Handmaid's Tale ever come. I'm sorry, this is the person I'm supposed to welcome as my sister in arms and put to the front of the lines of my feminism? This misogynist? This person who can't feel empathy for women's ultimate suffering? Bonus pic of the man who wrote that article. This is not a joke. This is literally his picture on Twitter.
So, like, I know this is supposed to be like a, look at how I'm being bullied and how evil these women are, but, like, literally nothing they said was false. That picture shows you as a man with colorful hair. You are a man fetishizing women's oppression and pain in a story that is literally built on real-life examples of women's oppression. And literally every single time in this video you've talked about it, it's been, women's oppression is real, but I should be included in it. I should be included in this thing. It doesn't include me enough. It doesn't center around me, and therefore I can't care about it. So where's the lie? What are you upset about? It's like someone saying, hey, Siren, you're black. Oh, no shit. No shit, Sherlock. It's not going to offend me if you call me what I am. And literally no one in these comments even used a slur against you. They just said, look at what this man looks like, and they said your biological sex. Oh wow, how horrible for you.
But these angry comments, which as I said came from self-proclaimed gender-critical feminists, which many more of us would know as TERFs, trans-exclusionary radical feminists, showcased a deep desire by them to defend and push back against my reading of The Handmaid's Tale, and trans people's place within it. In fact, many TERFs actually argued that as a trans woman, I wouldn't be one of the dead in Gilead, but actually one of the oppressors.
I think if you were faced with either death because they assumed you to be homosexual, or going back to the restraints of your gender, which would give you many privileges, mind you, you would choose to go back and re-identify as a man because it would make life a lot easier for you. In the same way that a lot of trans women do realize that it's easier to be trans in some contexts than in others, and they are more willing to flip back and forth when it benefits them. So yeah, you would either be an oppressor or you would have been dead because I thought you were homosexual.
Now, I've done a whole video breaking down TERFs and how their ideology often uses the language of and misunderstandings of feminism so as to obfuscate their direct attacks on the transgender community.
See, and this is what gets me. Like, first off, a man is trying to lecture to women about what feminism is. I think that's the funniest thing in the world. Like, this is the only context where you could get away with this, where an oppressor can lecture to the oppressed about their movement. Like, you cannot see that, well, you do see it with white people doing the same thing to black folks, but I just find that incredibly funny that you really think this is a defense. And then secondly, none of you really know what radical feminism actually stands for. You just see it as this boogeyman of people who are mean to me, and then you don't bother looking any deeper because you just think that everyone who doesn't like you is under the same banner. And that's just not true. A lot of radical feminists, myself included, would like to help people who are trans. Because a lot of you go into transitioning without not realizing exactly what you're getting in for. They don't really have informed consent for you. A lot of women who identify as trans end up getting mastectomies, end up getting unnecessary surgeries, end up hurting themselves, and then regretting it later. That's why we have rising rates of detransitioners. And of course, that's not to say that there's not harm in the trans community, because there's plenty of trans women who are using that moniker in order to hurt girls and women.
TERFs are folks, most often women, though not always, who deny the rights and identity of trans people, and especially especially trans women, who they see as men pretending to be women to, at best, fetishize womanhood, or at worst to them, to trick, harm, and hurt cisgender women like themselves. And these TERFs wield this ideology in a dogmatic attempt to limit the rights of trans people, and specifically, again, trans women.
I'm just going to leave this here without any comment.
TERFs, similarly, also understand that women's oppression often comes in the form of control of reproduction.
Patriarchy is organized around the extraction of resources from female bodies and minds in the service of men, including reproductive, sexual, emotional, and labor resources.
The issue is, however, that TERFs often frame the entirety of their womanhood and how they identify and how women are oppressed solely around reproductive health alone.
As opposed to what? The definition of a woman is an adult human female. That's the only thing that we have in common, that we are of the sex that produces ova. If you try to include anything else to make it a more inclusive definition, you end up turning it into a regressive definition based off of stereotypes. There is no way to win that includes you in the way that you want to be included.
In my original video, I talked about how TERFs often frame their womanhood through oppression and victimization, and that victimhood becomes the main identifier that TERFs have with their own selves. This often stems from a specific trauma that many of them have faced, but not always. But many TERFs define their victimhood through women's ability to reproduce, considering it the main and often sole way that women, and expressly cisgender women,
And
are
as a
oppressed.
class, we have faced and continue to face oppression based on our sex. So to say that oppression is one of the defining aspects of the female experiences is true. Oppression is a part of the female experience. It's not how you define being a woman, but because we are oppressed on the basis of our sex, those two things are difficult to untangle. They're mixed together.
The problem is, by defining womanhood and women's oppression solely through reproduction, it causes you to miss a whole bunch of other ways that women can be oppressed, trans or not, outside of women who have regularly functioning ovaries.
Everybody who tries to argue against radical feminist talking points has the same three arguments, and you know what? I have this ready. I have Helen Joyce's Trans: When Ideology Meets Reality right here. I have a whole bookshelf dedicated to books like these. Give me 1 second. We're going to read directly from this damn book. Women become orifices, providers of genetic material, vessels for growing offspring and milch cows. The same type of person ovulates, menstruates, gestates, gives birth, and requires abortions, and possesses the physical features that heterosexual men desire to look at, touch, and penetrate. It is a type of person who has been oppressed throughout history precisely because men want to dominate and control the possessors of this type of body. Dividing women up like this accentuates their power as a constituency. At any one time, it is different women who are menstruating, pregnant, breastfeeding, and postmenopausal, for example. How much harder would it be to argue for the vote for women, or for paid maternity leave, or to end the exemption that allowed men to rape their wives at will, if the only way to refer to the beneficiaries of such policies had been to list bodily secretions and sexual organs? Thank you, Helen Joyce, your queen. Anyhow, this, dear viewers, is where we're going to part for the day, because if I continue doing this one video in one long shot, this is going to be like a 3-hour video of me going every 5 seconds. I have an argument, because people like him always use the same couple arguments that we've already debunked, and honestly, he's going to end up repeating the same things from his TERF video, which I'm going to end up reviewing anyway. If you have any other videos you'd like me to look at, please send them to me. I hate having to search for these things on my own. I hate having to make myself witness the stupidity of the world we live in. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, leave them down below. Feel free to join my Discord, do the memberships, etc., etc., and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.